What is going on, everyone? Hope you're doing well. I just forgot to share the screen before I started this thing, but we got it now. So, hopefully everybody's doing well. Seems like my voice is not as good as it was yesterday. Hopefully that'll change. But if you remember, hey, no new assignment today. I feel like we got quite a few assignments. Some of the people that are normally like ahead of pace, they're still finishing up the Chief Joseph, and they haven't moved on to the persuasive technique. So, yet another day to have some time to work in class. Um, I'm going to try to get Ban the Ban in pretty soon, but just once I get home or once I'm not teaching, I'm just like, you know, need a little bit of time. This cold is kicking my butt, as they say. So, there's that. And then we'll get into a little bit of Harriet Tubman today. Maybe we'll read another 16 paragraphs or so. This is a pretty lengthy reading, but I think it's a good one. Hopefully you like it. When I read these things, I just kind of put myself in the position of some of the characters. I can't imagine. I can't imagine being where they're at now, where we last left them. Like Harriet Tubman was knocking on this door that she usually can bring people to. And they get a good meal and they get to sleep in some warmth. Because remember, they're sleeping, I don't know where, like probably not on the side of the road, but like back in the woods, maybe camouflage and stuff like that. They're sleeping during the day. Probably not a really good sleep. I don't know if you've ever slept in places where like you could get caught. Probably not, right? But I have a couple times for like the YouTube channel. I've like slept in a cemetery, I've slept in a McDonald's parking lot and stuff like that. And so you just never know if like somebody's gonna come and knock on your vehicle or whatever. So not like sleeping in a cemetery is anything close to being like a runaway slave, right? I don't want you to think I'm trying to compare myself to that, but I just know the feeling a little bit of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be sleeping right now. If you're a runaway slave, that means just horrible things, right? Being sold down south. I mean, whippings. Me, it was just like probably a police officer, like, hey, you really shouldn't be in the cemetery at night. Can you move on? Maybe a small fine or something like that. But I'm sure they're just not sleeping well. And who knows, even if you are a slave, in slave quarters, if you ever get a good night's sleep, probably not, right? So they might be used to that. But so she just knocked on the door and they were like, my place was searched last week. Fugitive slave law is in effect, so they could be punished. So they have to move on. So that promise of the hot meal, the promise of the nice warm sleep, no, they're on their own again. So hopefully you like this. I'm a fan, and we'll get back into this. I can make this a little bigger. I could probably make it even bigger. Yesterday, as I was watching this back in different classes, I was like that. And I'm old, so my eyes are not as good as yours probably. But even sitting in the back, I thought, oh, that's a little small. So I'll make it bigger here. And this is right picking up right where we left off. It was like she was turned away from this house. They said too many people, 11 people, remember? She turned away from the house, frowning. She'd promised her passengers food and rest and warmth. And instead of that, there would be hunger, cold, and more walking over the frozen ground. Somehow she would have to instill courage into these 11 people, most of them strangers, would have to feed them on hope and bright dreams of freedom instead of the fried pork and cornbread and milk she had promised them. And remember, it is possible here. She's carrying a gun to make sure that people aren't, getting cold feet. I know they have cold feet because they're walking on frozen ground, but so they don't say like, I want to just go back. And then it could get everybody in trouble. They could all get caught. All right, next paragraph, 18. They stumbled along behind her, half dead for sleep, and she urged them on, though she was as tired and discouraged as they were. She'd never been in Canada, but she kept painting wondrous word pictures of what it would be like. She managed to dispel their fear of pursuit so that they would not become hysterical, panic-stricken. Then she had to bring some of the fear back so that they would stay awake and keep walking, though they drooped with sleep. Right at the top. Yet during the day, when they lay down deep in a thicket, they never really slept. Because if a twig snapped or the wind sighed in the branches of a pine tree, they jumped to their feet, afraid of their own shadows, shivering, shaking. It was very cold, but they dared not make fires because someone would see the smoke and wonder about it. She kept thinking, 11 of them, $11,000 worth of slaves, and she had to take them all the way to Canada. Sometimes she told them about Thomas Garrett in Wilmington. Excuse me. She said he was their friend, even though he did not know them. He was the friend of all fugitives. He called them God's poor. He was a Quaker, and his speech was a little different from that of other people. His clothing was different too. He wore the wide brim hat that the Quakers wear. So hopefully this is familiar because of the video we watched. Quakers always on the side of slaves and former slaves, thinking that it was wrong, totally against their religion. She said that he had thick white hair, soft, almost like a baby's, and the kindest eyes she had ever seen. He was a big man and strong, but he never used his strength to harm anyone, always to help people. He would give all of them a new pair of shoes, everybody. He always did. Once they reached his house in Wilmington, they would be safe. He would see to it that they were. So as I'm reading this, I mean, based on what we know about the Quakers from the video and stuff, it seems like they might never turn anybody away because they were like, that was their religion. Slavery was wrong. If you know anything about certain types of religion, it's like they don't really care about the laws on earth. They're more concerned about the laws that they feel that God has. So, but in the back of my mind, as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh man, is he going to turn them away too? Maybe they won't get those new shoes. Maybe they won't be safe just based on what we've read before. But knowing what I know about the Quakers, hopefully this guy, Thomas, he's going to come through. But let's keep reading, see what happens. Like I said, I hope you enjoy this stuff. I mean, I know it's not the best, right? You could be at home playing video games or doing whatever. This is not as good as TikTok, I understand. But hopefully in the realm of education, you're like, you know what? It could be worse. It could be math. Just kidding. I know. Some people like math. I know. Some people like math. Some people hate English. It's boring. But hopefully there are a couple people like, man, I'm into this story. Hopefully you are. It's a little bit of an older one, of course, but I don't know. I like it. But of course, remember, I'm old. She described the house where he lived. Make sure this is big. You don't have to see my face. Yeah. She described the house where he lived, told them about the store where he sold shoes. She said he kept a pail of milk and a loaf of bread in the drawer of his desk so that he would have food ready at hand for any of God's poor who should suddenly appear before him, fainting with hunger. There was a hidden room in the store. Whole wall swung open, and behind it was a room where he could hide fugitives. On the wall, there were shelves filled with small boxes of shoes, so that you would never guess that wall actually opened. While she talked, she kept watching them. They did not believe her. She could tell by their expressions. They were thinking, new shoes, Thomas Garrett, Quaker, Wilmington, what foolishness was this? Who knew if she told the truth? Where was she taking them anyway? That night, they reached the next stop, a farm that belonged to a German. She made the runaways take shelter behind trees at the edge of the fields before she knocked at the door. She hesitated before she approached the door, thinking, suppose that he too should refuse shelter. Suppose. Then she thought, Lord, I'm going to hold steady onto you. You've got to see me through. And knock softly. Oh, here's a good word right here. She heard the familiar guttural voice say, who's there? All right, so I grew up I didn't like reading until I was 16, to be honest. I didn't like reading at all. And then I don't know why. Maybe my mom was like, hey, you better start reading or something like that, whatever. I didn't read a lot, to be honest, but at 16, I remember I got a book somehow called The Stand by Stephen King. Stephen King became my favorite author by far. Um, I've read almost every single thing he's written, and he loves that word guttural. It's a good word, guttural. It means like deep in the throat. So obviously with Stephen King books, people are dying quite a bit. So often their last like sounds or something guttural from within or whatever. But guttural, I love that word. I don't know. English teachers, right? We love words. I love that word, guttural. All right, who's there? She answered quickly, a friend with friends. And yesterday we learned that's the code. He opened the door and greeted her warmly. How many this time? He asked. 11, she said, and waited, doubting, wondering. He said, good, bring them in. 11, that's her biggest one yet, right? He and his wife fed them in the lamplit kitchen, their faces glowing as they offered food and more food, urging them to eat, saying there was plenty for everybody. Have more milk, have more bread, have more meat. They spent the night in the warm kitchen. They really slept all that night until dusk the next day. When they left, it was with reluctance. Yeah, I don't blame them. You don't really want to leave. Like, can I just stay here in this warm kitchen? Give me some more meat. Give me some more food. They'd all been warm and safe and well fed. It was hard to exchange the security offered by that clean, warm kitchen for the darkness and the cold of a December night. Go on or die. How are we doing on time here? So we're in about 12 minutes. Normally, I would say 12 minutes is enough, but stick with me here, okay? Another like 4 minutes or so. It's a long one, so I would love to finish this by the end of the week. Don't think we will because the end of the week's tomorrow. So this might carry over until Monday. But let's keep reading a little bit. I mean, maybe I'm just so clouded. Like, I like this book a lot, and maybe people are like, this sucks. I'm sure there are a lot of you in here like, whatever. Middle school sucks. Yeah, sort of does, right? There are better things to be doing out there, but hey, go on or die. That sounds like a good video game title. Harriet had found it hard to leave the warmth and friendliness too, but she urged them on. For a while, as they walked, they seemed to carry in them a measure of contentment. Some of the serenity and the cleanliness of that big, warm kitchen lingered on inside them. But as they walked further and further away from the warmth and the light, the cold and the darkness entered into them. They fell silent, sullen, suspicious. She waited for the moment when someone of them would turn mutinous. Oh, that's a good word. Mutiny. Mutinous is the adjective. Let's talk about that in a minute. It did not happen that night. Okay, so hang on. Let's get that part right there. Okay, so mutinous is the adjective. It describes something. A mutiny is a thing. Okay, so a mutiny is when like the crew of a boat or I don't know, maybe a classroom just goes against the teacher, starts rioting, starts picking up desks and throwing them. That would be a mutiny. So it's when like one person is in charge of like a bunch of people. And if that bunch of people wants to get angry and take over, they could. And if they do, it's called a mutiny. So one of the things that I never discussed here, but the coastal parts of South Carolina, that was some of the most dangerous places to be a slave because it required like there was rice growing there, and it required a lot of like manpower, a lot of slave labor. So excuse me. So slaves would be outnumbering like overseers, like 50-1. So the treatment was like usually a lot harsher. Not that, it could be harsh anywhere, but it was like probably one of the places where the most slave mutinies, usually call it like a slave uprising, would happen just because the people in charge were so outnumbered. All right, my voice is starting to fail, so maybe this is a good place for us to stop. But yeah, just want you to kind of know that. And remember, if you're living in South Carolina, it's going to be difficult for you to escape anyways, because there's such a distance between that and like freedom. So Maryland, Virginia, those type of places, that's where mostly slaves would have just an opportunity maybe to get away. All right. Enough for today. Rest of the time, I'll come around, probably still keep my distance. I don't know, but help in any way I can. If people are getting to the speeches, it can be pretty tough, especially I think appeal to reason might be the most difficult because it's just like, it's so simple, but it's just like the appeal to reason, just in case anybody's having trouble with that. A lot of people have. It's just like what you would think most people would agree to. And for the appeal to reason for most of those speeches, it's like all people are created equal. Like it's just like very basic. So that's probably one of the harder ones. If there's a little time, maybe it looks like people don't need it, we'll do a little Frank and Beans. But other than that, it could be the rest of the time to work on all these mini assignments we need to get to. And maybe I will get Band the Band into Power School.